الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله تعالى نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدًا عبد الله ورسوله أرسله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا فصلوات الله وسلامه عليه. We begin by praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise Him because He is worthy of praise, and His worthiness for praise comes from His names and His attributes which show us His perfection, subhanahu min ilah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the evils within ourselves and the evil consequences of our actions. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His peace and blessings upon the last and final messenger, upon his family, his companions, his wives, and all those who follow his way until the end of time. يا أيها الناس اتقوا ربكم الذي خلقكم من نفس واحدة وخلق منها زوجها وبث منهما رجالا كثيرا ونساء واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم وَمَنْ يُطَعِ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ فَقَدْ فَازَ فَوْزًا عَظِيمًا. We remind one another to be people of taqwa, which means to be conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our day-to-day affairs, in our actions and our decisions. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among the muttaqeen. Ameen ya Rabbil Alameen, amma ba'd. In a hadith, the companions narrate the following. غَلَا السِّعْرُ عَلَى عَهْدِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ فقالوا يا رسول الله عليه الصلاة والسلام سعر لنا قال إن الله هو المسعر القابض الباسط الرزاق وإني لأرجو أن ألقى ربي وليس أحد منكم يطلبني بمظلمة من دم في دم أو مال. In this hadith, the companions were dealing with inflation. Imagine that. The companions are dealing with inflation, as we're dealing with it today. Now for some, it's not too big of a deal, but for many others, it's a really big deal. And what I find incredible and very important for us to embrace when it comes to the lives of the companions and the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, is that there was never really an era of, or a phase of complete stability. They're always dealing with something. Sometimes that thing is really big, like war, and other times it's some inconveniences. But nonetheless, they were always dealing with something. And that is because the life of a believer is meant to be a life of tests. And I hope by now that the Muslim community, the American Muslim community, has learned to appreciate tests from Allah for what they really are. They are a form of empowerment. They are a form of elevation. It is a means for highlighting the good of this ummah. It's inconvenient, it's stressful, and we wish it doesn't happen, but it does. So let us embrace the wisdoms behind it, and let us work towards the solutions for them. So even in the time of the companions, after the wars and the persecution and the oppression, it wasn't just, a nice smooth sailing after a few series of tests. Rather, they were tested with inflation of all things. And so they go to the Prophet and they say, Ya Rasulullah, put a ceiling for the prices. In other words, use your power as the head of the state to enforce a price ceiling that the vendors cannot pass. And we hear murmurs of this here in America. Some people promote it, some say that would be a disaster, it doesn't work. Whatever it is, that's not the point of today's khutbah. The idea is there was a request from the companions. And what we need to focus on is the response of the Prophet ﷺ, because in that is the guidance. The Prophet responds and says, Allah is the one who causes prices to be what they are. When prices rise, Allah creates the scenario to cause them to rise. And when prices fall, Allah creates the scenario to cause them to fall. Inna Allahu al-musa'ir. Allah is the one who causes these things to happen. Now, of course, inflation is you can understand it as a man-made problem. But for the believer, we don't just look at the man-made side of this. Rather, we learn to appreciate the divine side of this. Had Allah willed, this would not have happened. But it has happened, and therefore Allah willed it to happen. And for the believer, we always look at it from a positive lens. What are we to gain from this? And what are we exactly being tested for? Allah is the one who causes this to happen. Al-Qabid, He is the one who takes away. Al-Basit, He is the one who gives more. He's creating a mindset of the believer in terms of how Allah is involved even in the economic ups and downs. When Allah wants to, He will make things, very easy, the economy flourishing. And when He wants to, He takes it away. And when you look at the past 100 years of the Muslim Ummah, what was once the prosperous part of the Muslim world, like Syria, for example, very prosperous, like Egypt, we're talking about 100 years ago, we're not talking about ages ago, have now become the places of economic disparity. And the places that were in economic disparity, like the Gulf, are now places of economic hubs. This is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's divine wisdom. And no, this doesn't mean we don't criticize certain players, but the divine side is worth observing. Allahu ar-Razzaq, He is the one who provides. In other words, you can be in the most economically prosperous part of the world, yet still be afflicted with poverty. And you can be in the most economically despairing part of the world, yet prosper. And so for the believer, while we work to make better economic conditions, and we hold people accountable in terms of those who made it worse, and there are people who make it worse, at the same time, our stress levels are maintained by understanding if Allah wants to provide me, and despite the economic disparity, it can happen. فَإِنَّ اللَّهُ وَالرَّزَّاقُ, because Allah is the provider. And then the Prophet ﷺ continues and says, and I want to return to Allah without having oppressed anybody, without anybody approaching me saying, you prevented me from my own prosperity, whether that's in blood or in wealth. So we look at the world today, dear brothers and sisters, and it is becoming a maelstrom of conflict, where multiple powers from the west and from the east, from the north and from the south, are battling over certain grounds. Now the most recent being erupted once again is that of Syria, and of course the ongoing conflict in Palestine and Palestine. And we Muslims are sitting there as bystanders looking at this and saying, man, we have been struggling for 20 years, at least 20 years of constant struggle Between the war on terror, to Islamophobia, to the Palestine situation, to the Arab Spring, to the natural disasters in Pakistan and Indonesia, to whatever it is, and we have been pouring our money to at least assist them financially. When are we just going to be submerged into the conflict? Well, this hadith is providing us guidance that we're not going to be submerged in these conflicts. We're not going to drown in these conflicts so long as we act it out correctly. We navigate the conflicts correctly. And so one thing that we really need to embrace in this regard is that while we deal with conflict and while we pursue solutions and resolutions to resolve these conflicts, we have to be very, very aware of what our hearts are dependent on and who our hearts are attached to. Now Mr. Trump wants to introduce a new Department of Government, DOGE, right? To check out, what's happening with federal spending, to cut the, sounds wonderful, right? But for some people, this is fantastic. They're just imagining a future of prosperity for America. The golden age is yet to come. Maybe that's true. But other people, like myself, look at those who have been delegated for this task, the richest person in the world and another business person, and really wonders, do these people really care about the average American? Is the average American really in their best interest to do the right thing, to really cut government spending in a way that actually reflects in the livelihood of the average American? I highly doubt that, but maybe I'm wrong. Also, when you look at the tension between the Democrats and the Republicans, my guess is that they're going to use that Department of Government to undermine the Democrats. Whether they deserve it or not, again, is not the point I'm trying to make. But the idea is for those people who look to this new Department of Government thinking, yes, they're going to make our lives better, reflect on this hadith. For the Prophet ﷺ is saying, not Elon Musk, not Ramaswamy, whatever his name is, Vivek, is going to make your lives better. It's Allah who makes your life better. It is not them who are truly going to make the economy better. It is Allah's will that's going to make the economy better. And I keep reiterating, yes, we do our part. That is part of our Islamic responsibilities. But while we do our part, our hearts are dependent and hopeful in who? In Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not Elon Musk, not Mr. Trump, not Ramaswamy. In Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And know, dear brothers and sisters, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tests the heart over and over again to expose to us who and what our hearts are attached to. Because what made the companions successful is not their might or their wit or their cleverness or their ability to outmaneuver their opponents. No doubt they were phenomenal individuals. What made them so fantastically successful is that whatever challenge came to them, their hearts immediately gravitated to Allah, depended on Allah, and did what they needed to do. That is what the American Muslim community needs to look like. That is what we need to learn from all of these tests that have come and gone in our lives for the past 20, 25 years. Has our hearts become more dependent on Allah, more submissive to Allah, more hopeful in Allah, attached to Allah or not? If the answer is yes, and I hope it is yes, and I'm optimistic that it is yes. If the answer is yes, then the tests are working, and they're working in our favor. So while we hope for a better future, we hope for it while our hearts are dependent on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's not go to the either extremes where yes, they're going to make everything better, and no, they're going to make everything worse, but rather say, we hope for the best, but we're going to trust Allah to bring out the best. That is the middle way. Another lesson we learn from this hadith, or what we can start deriving from this hadith, is as follows. When things become difficult, when the economy especially is out of order, certain people make big money off of it. There's this guy, Robert, I forgot his name, this Japanese individual who's very wealthy. he's talking about the upcoming inflation, the upcoming recession. And he says, oh, we're going to get really rich. And he's smiling. He can't wait till the vast majority of Americans are suffering so that he can make money. That right there, dear brothers and sisters, is called greed. That is called shuh in the Arabic language, in the Quranic language. And the Prophet says, إِيَّاكُمْ وَالشُّحْ فَإِنَّ الشُّحَّ أَهْلَكَ مَنْ قَبْلَكُمْ. Be careful of greed, because greed destroyed societies before you. And if there's one clear clear ailment that the American population is suffering from, it is greed. The greed of these corporations, the greed of these billionaires and these millionaires. Greed is destroying this country, and everybody knows it. And these billionaires will buy their politicians, and the politicians serve their donors, and it's just this vicious cycle of greed. And we see, wallahi, we see what the Prophet is saying coming to light in front of our eyes. This type of greed will destroy this country. So the Prophet says, be careful of greed. And we Muslims, while some of us are able to profit off of these recessions, and I'm not saying it's haram to, by the way. We Muslims can never succumb to greed. And so look at what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. In the aftermath of the defeat of Uhud, where the community was suffering, where people now have to take on unexpected medical bills, as they say. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَأْكُلُوا الرِّبَا أَضْعَافًا مُضَاعَفًا وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ. Out of nowhere, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this context start talking about interest. Don't take interest and fear Allah so that you are successful. What does this have to do with Uhud? And the answer is, when a community is suffering, there is opportunity for certain people to take advantage of that suffering. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, don't you dare. Don't you dare take advantage of the suffering of people for your own self-gain. Yes, I understand the economy is a certain way, and certain people can, in halal ways, benefit off of that. But we cannot develop this attitude of taking advantage of people who are suffering. That's called shuh. That's called greed. And we are prohibited from doing that. And societies are destroyed as a result of that. But rather our model is that of the companions, radiyallahu ta'ala anhum jami'an, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised a family from the Ansar, who they themselves were economically strained. But despite that strain, they welcomed a few individuals who were in need of some food. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises them and says, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Those who do not let their greed take over their decisions and their actions, those are the successful people. And this leads to the third point, dear brothers and sisters. While we are in times of conflict, wallahi, global conflict and turmoil, and we are suffering and struggling day to day, there is so much opportunity for the American Muslim community in light of all of this. But I just said, don't take advantage of these things for your own self-gain. Oh, the opportunity is not economic. The opportunity is winning the hearts and minds of people. Because while certain individuals will greedily take advantage of the circumstances, Muslims are developing institutions, developing projects and efforts and initiatives to help those who are suffering. And if we, or some of the American Muslim community, gets prosperous as a result of these circumstances, we Muslims will be seen, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, must be seen as people, when we have resources, we share those resources with others. Because that's what the Qur'an teaches us, doesn't it? وَفِي أَمْوَالِهِمْ حَقٌّ لِلسَّائِلِ وَالْمَحْرُومِ. In our wealth is a right for those who are in need. What that essentially translates into, dear brothers and sisters, that when we look at our bank account and we see the number that's there, we understand that by divine ordinance, not all of those dollars are for me. There's a portion of that wealth which I earned that's for somebody else, those who are in need. That's the attitude of the believer. So imagine the average American looking at the politicians, making money off of the circumstances. Nancy Pelosi, takes advantage of Nvidia and she becomes so much wealthier. Wow. I wonder how much she really cares about the average American. When they're looking at the corporations sucking the American community dry of their wealth, and you have somebody come and shoot the CEO of United Healthcare. Now, we don't know the motive, but we do see the reaction of the internet. Wallahi, somebody said, my empathy is out of network. Sorry, I can't share that with you. This is the attitude. While the Americans are looking to these people in that way, let it be seen, let them see American Muslims as people who, despite the difficulties, despite the strain that we too are suffering from, struggling with, that we still commit ourselves based on the principle of وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Those who avoid greed and remain generous in times of difficulty, they are successful. Let them see this come to light. And if they see that, whose side are they going to be on? Their politicians, their corporations, and their billionaires, or on the side of people who actually care about the average human being? So there is great opportunity in that regard, and we must take advantage of this. And so, dear brothers and sisters, in this time of immense conflict, let us get inspiration from the last verse of Surah Al-Hajj, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَاهِدُوا فِي اللَّهِ حَقَّ جِهَادِهِ هُوَ اجْتَبَاكُمْ. Strive and struggle for the sake of Allah. Every day is a struggle. But for the believer, that's exciting because each struggle, each step we take in the struggle is raising our ranks in this life and the afterlife. Strive for the cause of Allah, the way that is befitting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as the verse goes on, Allah makes it clear. فَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِاللَّهِ هُوَ مَوْلَاكُمْ. The real struggle is not one of economics. It's not one of land. It's not one of power. The real struggle of the believer is their ability to maintain their morals, their principles, their ethics, despite the difficulties. That is the real test. So look at ourselves, dear brothers and sisters. Look at the American Muslim community over the past 25 years. Have we maintained our values? And I say confidently, yes, we have. Not only have we maintained it, we've become better at it. And no, we haven't become the wealthiest community in America. No, we don't have the biggest corporations in America. But what we have and what is necessary now and what is needed to the globe today, to the average human being, is to see a group of people who, despite their opportunity to take advantage of circumstances, to take advantage of the weak, that we don't do that because we have values. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes that verse and says, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِاللَّهِ هُوَ مَوْلَاكُمْ فَنِعْمَ الْمَوْلَى وَنِعْمَ النَّصِيرُ. That as we go through these struggles, whatever they may be, you have a guardian, and your guardian is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you have a supporter, and your supporter is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So continue forward. Keep doing the good work that you are doing. Put your trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not in a president, not in a department of government. Hope for the best, because hope is so intrinsic to the Muslim experience. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be our guardian and to be our supporter. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, a quick moment for our brothers and sisters in Syria. As we already know, about a little over a decade ago, a civil war broke out in Syria. And ever since then, it's been nothing short of a disaster. The loss of life in the millions, about 12 million, I believe, have become refugees. And even before that, the tyranny of the Assad regime, who has been governing Syria for 50 plus years. Wallahi, it's one of the worst dictatorships that the Muslim Ummah has seen in its history. And even before that, our brothers and sisters in Syria were struggling to resist the occupation of France. This is a country that has been in turmoil and struggle for 100 years or more. But let us appreciate Syria for what it is in terms of our history. Syria isn't just a place in the Muslim world. Syria has always been a necessary part of the health of the ummah. Syria has Damascus, one of the oldest cities, and some argue the oldest city in human history. Damascus is the house, the home of some of the most brilliant scholars in Islam, like Ibn Qayyim, like Ibn Taymiyyah, like An-Nawawi, among many others. And so a healthy Syria is a healthier ummah, and a struggling Syria is a struggling ummah. And while our attention is very much on Palestine, and it should be, the reason for that is that we can face off, we can challenge the root cause of the Palestinian conflict here in America, that of Zionism. We also have to see Syria simultaneously as equally important. I understand it's more complex than Palestine, and there's a lot more going on. And now it's become an opportunity to grab additional power by multiple players in the global international community. But we have to see Syria for what it is and appreciate it for what it is. And while I don't know what we can do as of now, go to our political activists for more insight on how we can support the Syrian cause. I thought I'd just give a moment to highlight the importance of Syria. We have to see a better Syria, a united Syria, an economically healthy Syria. We have to see that. And we cannot let internal division divide that country anymore. And I understand it's very complex and very sensitive to many people, even the Syrians themselves. But what we need to aim for is very clear and very simple. A country that has a government that is just, an economy that is prosperous, and us, we have to support them in any way we can. I want to see, and I hope to see, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, tourist trips from America to Syria, because there's so much history there. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to resolve that situation once and for all. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not let the next few years pass by except that situation is resolved. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make the future of the Levant area better and prosperous. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to contribute to that prosperity. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be people who relieve and alleviate the plight of our brothers and sisters in Syria, in Palestine, in Sudan, in Kashmir, in Yemen, in East Turkestan, in Myanmar, wherever Muslims are suffering and struggling. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to accept that from us. Allahumma ighfir lil muslimin wal muslimat wal mu'minin wal mu'minat al ahya'i minhum wal amwat innaka sami'un qareebun mujibud da'awati rabbil alamin wa aqim as-salah.